All right. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
All right. My name is Landis, and I work at the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment at SUNY ESF. And like Katie, I have to give the disclaimer that I'm speaking for myself and not my institution. And you see a couple of other names up there on the slide. The content that I'm about to share with you is not all mine, so I can't take credit for it. There was a group of us scientists from Memorial College, from ESF, from Audubon, who came together last year to prepare a comment on the draft environmental impact statement. So the information I'm sharing tonight, well, it comes from a group of us. I just wanted to give credit where credit is due. And I also want to say how much I enjoyed Katie's presentation. And mine's a little more, a little drier maybe. And speaking about the wetlands at Micron specifically, and what the plans are for what we call the mitigation, which is to try to kind of make up for the loss. But anyway, I just wanted to say what a great job you did. Hopefully I can build it. Okay, next slide. So in some of these documents that we were reading, the land at Micron at the site was described as vacant land. And this could not be further from the truth. And you can see, it's a little hard to read, I know it's small print, but that's a list of ecological communities that is taken right from the environmental impact statement. And Katie already told you about some of the wetland communities, including Shrub Swamp, Red Maple, Hardwood Swamp, the Hemlock Hardwood Swamp, the Emergent Swamp, the Emergent Marsh. And then, so a lot of wetland communities and also what we call upland communities, which would be forest, whole field, etc. So this was, I went out there to see this site before it was developed, and to me, it was, the habitat was as good as on some of these state wildlife areas I've seen. So not vacant land.
Here's your first surprise.
There they are. Thank you. Yeah, so this just those ecological communities that I listed. Here you can see the map here, and what is, I'm not even, I am surprised, but I want to know what this big red chunk is here. Okay, successional shrubland. The crosshatch areas here, this is wetland, so quite a bit of wetland, and we'll see more detail about the wetlands on the site, but we're a very diverse site, right? Lots of colors there, lots of different plant and animal communities. So just to give us a definition of wetlands, we've been talking about them, but you may wonder, what is a wetland? There's a very specific legal definition for a wetland, and it's based on 3 components. One is water. There needs to be standing water or at least a high water table for at least part of the growing season. So there needs to be water. Wetlands also have special soils because they're waterlogged, they're deprived of oxygen. So we get what we call hydric soils, and a soil ecologist, soil biologist can actually go out and test the soil to see if it's a wetland or not. And then the third component is a particular plant community, plants that are adapted to living in wetlands. So you don't see a cattail in a forest, right? Because it's a wetland adapted plant. And there are many species that are adapted to live in wetlands. And so those 3 components, water, soil, and plants. And what I'm illustrating here are 3 sort of general categories of wetland communities that we have or had maybe at the Micron site, which is emergent marsh. Those are herbaceous plants. So think of things like bulrushes and cattails, sedges, and then shrub swamps. So that could be willows, alder, buttonbush, and then forested wetlands. Things like silver maple, what do you call it, black gum, red maple, etc. So these are the 3 sort of general category kinds of wetlands that are or were at the Micron. Again, too much small print, but I kind of wanted to show you that this comes straight out of the environmental impact statement. It's talking about the main benefits that wetlands provide that tend to get neglected. As Katie said, there's still kind of a negative attitude towards wetlands on the part of many people. But you can see things like groundwater recharge, that's our drinking water supply. Flood flow alteration, and, we'll talk about that later, either Maddie or myself. Katie talked about the threatened and endangered species habitat. So these bats, I'm guessing were probably living near the wetlands just because they're gonna produce so many more insects. Yeah, general wildlife habitat, water purification, very important function. Yeah, the drinking water function. And then here, this was some, a figure that came from some work by Hillary McManus at the Warren College. She figured out that, so Micron is projected to lose about 200 acres of wetlands. And she's pointing out here that the loss of 300 acres of wetlands, freshwater wetlands, as opposed to like saltwater, salt marshes, that kind of thing. You can lose hundreds of thousands of tons of carbon just in that, destroying the wetland. And then you continue to lose because that wetland is now no longer a sink to sequester, to gather, to collect from. And that's equivalent to the emission for 1 year for 66,000 cars. So Micron kind of ignored the climate change impacts, but they're big, both in terms of carbon emissions, but also thermal regulation. I mean, think about it, which is producing more heat on those 90-degree days we had, like a parking lot or a wetland? It's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
In terms of temperature model.
Mhm.
All right, next slide. So here we're looking at the Micron site, and each of those little numbers, which I don't expect you to read, these are actually delineated wetlands. So these are legally marked wetlands. This was through the federal wetland delineation process. And what I invite you to notice here is how they're not concentrated in any one area. They're kind of scattered throughout the site. This site is kind of a giant wetland, or was, just a big sponge. And Katie and I were just talking about one of the objectives that they now have for construction is lowering the water table, which means drying the darn thing out. And I think you said there's water pooling on site. Yeah, that's gonna be a problem. So about 400 acres. So mostly the emergent, but also some shrub, swamp, and forested wetlands. Next slide. Oh, this is a surprise.
Yes.
So here we have direct losses of, so we call those jurisdictional wetlands because they're legally delineated and protected. But you can see, so POW is not a prisoner of war, it's palustrin, open water, these are just different wetland names, palustrin emergent, palustrin shrub, swamp, and forest. So here you can just see the totals that are being lost, and the important figure is the total about 200 acres of wetlands that will be lost. But that's kind of broken down. Did you want to say anything else?
Yeah, I was wondering, the 1A, 1B, 2A, the 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B refers to the FABs, correct?
I don't know.
I'm guessing it does. Yeah, that's what I would guess, because this is done kind of in two sets of projects. It's done over 20 years, but it's kind of like FABs 1 and 2 are the first, FABs 3 and 4 later.
Right, and they do say they're moving from west to east. And that was in talking about the bats, and what they were saying was, well, they're starting over here, so the bats can move further east, because it's gonna take us 20 years to get there, and that's debatable, but that's later.
Do you
That's
think
later.
they're the whole area though? It looks like all the trees are down.
Quite possibly. But I'm telling you what they're saying, this is the rhetoric. Oh my goodness, more new slides.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, so we have cover types, I'm not even sure what's on here, whoops. So the orange, this big orange area, shrub, scrub, green, deciduous forest is green. Looks like what this is showing is basically there's this band of wetlands here. But it's quite a large band, and what is this pink thing here? Development, okay, so that could be like a power line for, oh, no, that's a road, that could be a road, that might be Burnett Road.
Maybe that's Burnett, yeah.
This is a picture of one of the wetlands on Micron when Katie and I went out to see it. It's obviously a forested wetland. And you can see those trees that have fallen over and you can see the cracks in the bark. That's exactly where these little bats like to roost. So you need mature trees and you need them to be dead and to have these cracks in the bark or things like that. And if you look at that picture, you see the standing water. You see the wetland vegetation, the cattails, or I'm not sure what exactly that is. But a site like this is gonna be incredibly productive for amphibians, for insects, for small mammals, for just all kinds of things, like concentrating light. This is the kind of thing that concentrates light, even compared to like an upland forest or a meadow. There's just no comparison. If you look at like the number of different kind of plants, or even the number of plants in a square meter of wetland versus a forest, it's gonna be many times greater. So what is Better Micron going to do? They're gonna destroy, like I said, about 200 acres directly. But, and remember we said there's 400 acres total, probably there's gonna be indirect effects from construction, from sediment flow, from changing the water delivery pattern. All those are very important to maintain wetlands. And so my guess is there's gonna be indirect effects, pollution, either too much water, too little water on the remaining wetlands, unfortunately. And then regionally, if you think of Micron, it's not gonna be built in isolation. There's gonna be all kinds of subsidiary industry that we're already reading about in the paper. There's gonna be more housing, more shopping centers, more office, more roads, I mean, you name it, right? All kinds of development. So I would have guessed we're gonna lose many more acres of wetlands. You don't have a number. So what's the plan to make up for this loss? We call this mitigation. So because they're destroying wetlands, they have to create new ones. So how do they do this? Well, they find areas ideally that were once wetland. Because it's very hard to make a wetland where you didn't historically, or you can't recreate the hydrology. Because if you can't keep it wet, it's not gonna be a very good wetland. So what we're seeing here in the map on the right, so we're in the Oneida River watershed. The Oneida River's here. There's Micron. And then each of these kind of salmon colored polygons is a different mitigation site. So they were told to select mitigation sites within the Oneida River watershed. So this is what they've done. And you can read about this in great detail if you go to the county website. And you can pull up this, the wetlands mitigation plan. It will tell you exactly, how many acres of different kinds of wetlands they're creating, what kind of plants, how it will be monitored over the year. And this is an organization called the Wetlands Trust that has been buying these properties and doing the work. So I think next slide. Another surprise. So I guess you've highlighted this. So these are the 6 sites. And I guess the good news is in each case, they're reestablishing wetlands in areas that were formerly wetlands and were probably drained for agriculture. So has anybody here heard of tiling? Okay, there was actually something that was invented in New York State, and it's a way to drain wetlands. And they thought it was the greatest thing, because like Katie said, and they wanted to, they thought wetlands were wastelands and deserts. So they wanted to drain them for something more useful, reclaim them, that was the word for agriculture. So I guess the good news about these 6 sites is that they were probably once wetland and they're being reclaimed.
So we're reclaiming them to be what they were originally.
Yeah, so that's a good thing.
Okay.
However, this is what they look like now. Well, this was a year ago, so it might look a little different, but basically they've been in soybean production. They want to start from scratch. And what's the issue here? Does anybody pick up an issue like we looked at that last part?
Well, what about the chemicals that have been put down from previous use?
That's an issue. But if you're a turtle or a bird, This is gonna take decades.
Yeah.
To offer those same benefits that the wetlands, even just the one I showed you, that Micron. That we're Micron, we're providing like now. So I would predict there's gonna be a major die-off of life because they just don't have anywhere to go. And there's no plan for, removal of wildlife from the site except for birds and things that could fly and such. But anyway, I can't remember which site that is, but that is one of the 6 reclamation sites. Yes,
Where's the water supposed to come from to reestablish the wetlands?
what they do is, like I said, this is probably tile, if this is a former wetland. So they remove the tile, so the tile drains the water. So if you take out the tile, they're gonna get standing water. The other thing they do to get the water out of the fields, a farmer doesn't want a wetland, a farmer wants a nice dry cornfield. So they plug the drainage ditches. So they kind of reverse the agricultural practices that they established to drain the wetland. And lots of times just doing that the water will come back and it will stay and you'll have enough waterlogged soil, which is what you want. That's what I would guess. I mean, apparently we had invited someone from the Wetlands Trust to come and explain things like that, but. Yes,
Will they be required to plant?
oh yeah, that's what, the wetlands mitigation plan goes into great detail about what kind of wetlands. I think they might even get down to like how many plugs. And where, they have very detailed maps. I mean, all that part is very good, but it's gonna take decades. Maybe centuries.
Maybe not, maybe not.
Well, the forested wetlands, it will take decades.
Forested,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. But
agree.
you're right, an emergent marsh could be made fairly quickly. You're right.
Yeah, and because I know, this is probably, you're not gonna like to hear this, but it's been successful on the southwestern end of Onondaga Lake.
Yeah, no,
Perfect.
I
but it has
something
been
to say about that.
yeah,
What about invasive species?
Well,
There's
that's
a
another
battle
question, yeah.
to keep out the phragmites, so they plant all this.
right,
And it looks great for 5 years, and then before you know it, the whole thing is just covered with phragmites.
yeah.
Unless you have, it's almost impossible to keep it.
Yeah, I don't wanna sound, I think the Wetlands Trust is a great organization, they do great work. It's wonderful that these are being reclaimed. I'm just saying, the piece that's missing is gonna take a while, at least to get to the forested stage, so.
None of us here are opposed to reclamation or replacing these wetlands. We want that to happen.
Yes,
That trust you were speaking of,
Yes.
is that privately funded or publicly funded?
yeah, it's privately funded, it's like a land trust, except they focus on wetlands. And they also do a lot of, they get a lot of mitigation funding, they work with corporations as well as other organizations.
I have,
Wetlands Trust, you may be familiar with it from if you follow the Onondaga Lake NRDA. Does anybody know, does anybody follow that? So, the NRDA was to replace the lost services that had been, the public was deprived of because of the contamination of Onondaga Lake. And some of the compensation came in the form of wetlands. And the Wetland Trust was the recipient of some of those wetlands. In other words, they're holding them for the public good. So it's a good organization. Yeah, I want to make sure, and I'm not critical of them, but there are some flaws in the process, that's all I'm saying. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes.
I had another tangential
Yeah.
question, because she brought up invasive species.
Yes.
So was there any survey of the Micron site for invasive?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And how much, I
There's
couldn't
a
really see
field
that.
invasive species plan, again, if you go to the county, if you just Google Onondaga County Micron EIS, you'll find a very detailed invasive species plan for the Micron site itself. And also, I'm sure the Wetlands Trust is obligated to maintain these sites. They can't maybe keep phragmites out of 100%, but they're required to have so much cover of native species, maybe like 80%. One of the issues though, and I have it here, is that Number 5. I believe, and I maybe Benny to know, but I believe these, measures will be enforced for like 25 years. And it is my opinion that they should be enforced in perpetuity, because these wetlands supposedly will provide habitat for forever, right? I mean, I think that's the idea. So this was just some of the ideas we came up with as a group for kind of a better response to the fact that they're using wetlands. And some of this is based on the fact that Micron is receiving billions of dollars in public subsidies. So to me, and to many people, that kind of raises the bar for what we expect them to do to make up for public losses of wetlands and the services that we saw, that Katie talked about.
Aren't they also reporting record file?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, aren't they also, just the gifts,
Yes,
aren't they also reporting record sales and profits?
Yes,
Oh.
yes, they are.
that's where I
Yeah, no, their valuation has escalated dramatically. Yeah, they're worth over $1 trillion.
So
Corporation.
they spent 10 million for a true wet mitigation plan, I think so. And I didn't mention this, but they're replacing wetlands at a 2-to-1 ratio, which just means the 6 sites we saw, if you add those up, that's a little more than twice as much as the 200 acres that will be lost. So I think it's like 500 acres. And what we're saying is, and why 2-to-1? Why not 5-to-1? Why not 10-to-1? You know, that number needs to be bumped up. And then add mature wetlands, and that makes up the fact that right now we have these wetlands that are, really starting from scratch. And like you said, they can come back pretty quickly, but some of them are going to take longer, like the photo.
So by that you mean wetlands that currently exist should be
Yes.
protected?
Yes, exactly. For example, some of the floodplain forests along the Oneida River, at least the remaining ones. Or any wetlands that are close and maybe similar in species makeup, maybe add to Cicero Swamp.
So that's not in the plan, to your knowledge?
There is some of that, for example, Micron paid for White Lake,
Right,
but it's not in the wetland mitigation plan specifically.
okay.
And then if you think about the Micron site, could you redesign the plan for, where the fabs are, et cetera, to reduce impacts? And I think they're doing that to some extent. Again, if you look at the environmental impact statement, they say they are, but it's gonna be tough. I think you guys may know the number of parking spaces, is it 12,000? I mean, these are huge parking.
Oh, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so next slide. Also, some of you may know, the New York State passed a new wetlands law, which is good because the federal government's going the other direction. It was passed by our legislature in 2022, effective 2025. And this makes it possible to include a much larger area of wetlands as what we call jurisdictional, like I said, protected. So here's some suggestions. So Micron, for the first iteration, did not follow this law, the new law. They went with the old law. And what we're saying is, hey, they're gonna be here, they're getting all this public money, 2025, close enough, they should follow the spirit of the law, and they should really be following the new law. So review all wetlands on the site regardless of size. And why 7.4 acres? Well, because right now, or the old law said that to be a wetland protected, it had to be something like 12.4 acres. So now they were dropping that number down. And not only that, but they could be even smaller than 7.4 acres if they are of what's called local importance, which means they reduce flooding, they filter drinking water, they provide important habitat, things like vernal pools. Has anybody ever heard of a vernal pool?
Yeah.
Vernal pool is a small temporary wetland. It's like basically a pool with some wetland vegetation around it. And they're very important for breeding amphibians. It's basically where salamanders, frogs, toads breed, many of them anyway. So. Okay,
I have a comment on that. And
oh, yes, please.
there's a court judge in, southwestern New York that just threw out that new law. He decided that the state did not follow the proper procedures in getting that law instituted. And the state has not decided whether they're going to appeal that ruling yet.
You know, I looked,
So that's on,
Yeah.
that's on hold. That new-
well, I don't know, because I talked to, Derek Lance, who's the regional director for the DEC, and I asked her about this. She said, that was a law that was passed by the legislature. So at least in Region 7, they're still, enforcing it. So,
But I think that's gonna go statewide, so that's.
Yeah.
That's gonna have to be redone. So.
Yeah, no,
Those on hold are no longer enforcing those, the new regulations.
well, okay, according to Darren, they were, but,
And they don't have to do anything.
yeah,
Yeah,
anyway,
but-
so there's some, yeah, anyway, yes.
Back on the slide from where it said that the wetlands filter water.
Yes,
What impact will it be while there's, a farmland with chemicals in the soil that is becoming a wetland? Is that putting those chemicals into our water system and drinking water?
That's a good question. It just depends on. This is where I'm not a geochemist, you know, Maddie might be better able to answer that question. It was probably a lot worse when it was a farm field, because then you have a drainage ditch. And the others, the farmer's actively draining flowing water off the field. Now, a lot of that water is actually going to stay on site because they plug the ditches. And it will either infiltrate into the ground or evaporate. So at least compared to having a farm site, there's gonna be a lot less runoff with the chemicals in it. Yeah. But yeah, again, I'm not a chemist. But also those chemicals will gradually break down. And, oh, Don Hughes is here.
No, they won't.
And I think
Yeah.
that there's some potential, I guess, that, you know, with phytoremediation, the plants could help break things down. If they're, you know, the right kind of chemicals, so I would say there's gonna be a lot less concern about drinking water pollution. If it's a one. So this is from Roger Downs at the Sierra Club, who did this, that want to acknowledge his mapping. And all this is showing is the acreage of wetlands that would be protected under the new law and the old law. So the old laws is to the left there, and then the new law is to the right. So it really increases the acreage that would be considered for protection.
That might help with some of the new industry buildings or companies that
Yeah.
are coming to support my project.
Yeah, as long as they enforce it, yeah, because the gentleman who pointed out that about the litigation,
Yeah.
we'll see. But as far as I know, I heard from the DEC director that they're enforcing it this one. So now we're gonna jump to bats. So these 3 species of bats, along with others, were found on the site, as some of you may have read from paper, etc. The first 2 are federally listed endangered species. The tricolor bat is proposed for listing. So these are very rare, special bats. Not only are they present, but they were documented at levels that make people think that they were actually reproducing. You know, maternity sites, like this is a big deal for species whose numbers are going down by like 70–80% every year, which is populations are crashing. That they have a place where they're actually reproducing and raising young. Okay, next slide. And if you wonder what danger means, well, so WNS is white nose syndrome. It's a terrible disease that affects bats. That's really doing a number on our bat populations across the board. Statewide population decline is 72%. This is for the Indiana bat. You know, that's just not sustainable. That's heading towards at least local extinction. Declines in New York State since the introduction of white nose syndrome have been among the most severe, are approaching 100%. That means like losing these bats in New York State. So this is a really, really serious thing that they're taking this bat
So do the bat boxes help?
Oh, boy, I'm not a bad expert. Let me say that first. I think they help. I think they're not the preferred habitat, you know, a tree. Well, I don't know. I mean, what I hear from Vanessa, who's our bat expert, is some species use them more than others. I think some of these rare species, they're rare because they're picky. And I don't think they use the bat boxes so much as like little brown bats and some of the more common birding bats.
You know that the Lutheran church near Micron had a speaker come talk about bat
Okay.
boxes, and
Yeah.
several people in the church ordered them.
That's great. So kind of the upshot is bats are in trouble. There's some mitigation sites, I think I have a map on the next slide. In other words, they say, well, the bats gonna lose this habitat at Micron, but guess what? We're gonna set aside this other acreage, these other sites that we think is good bat habitat, and the bats can go find it hopefully. Although I'm not sure how that happens. There's no evidence at this point that these new sites will be used. To know that, you'd actually have to man these micron bats and track them as they're coming out of hibernation. And that wasn't done, as far as we know. So. Just showing you the mitigation sites, that's the United River there. You know, somewhere as much as, over 10 miles away, and that's a tough ask for a little bat. It's coming out of hibernation. It's lost its energy reserves, you know, because of it uses them up for the big warm in winter. And they have what's called site fidelity, so they go back to the same roost. You know, we don't know what's gonna happen to these bats, but to me, it doesn't look good. Okay, so quickly going to birds. So Micron did in their environmental impact statement talk about birds. And I wanted to step back for a minute and talk about a bigger context, which is just in North America generally, we have lost 3 million birds since 1970, which I believe is like 1/3 of all the birds that we have in North America. This is rare birds, but it's also common birds, things like robins and red-winged blackbirds. We just have fewer and fewer birds. So Katie talked about the heron rookery. This is actually a heron rookery at Micron. It's gonna be destroyed if it hasn't been destroyed already. Is it gone? It's gone. Anyway, over 100 species that are at least possibly breeding here. Again, breeding is a big deal. Next.
One of those herons visits our pond, Liz,
Nice.
or used to. I don't know if they still
there.
So they're threatened and endangered birds along with the bats. These are state listed threatened and endangered, short-eared owl, northern harrier. A lot of grassland dependent birds are not necessarily threatened or endangered, but populations are crashing. So the mitigation for birds looks at only grassland species, which is kind of lame because there are forest species, there's wetland species like the heron. So they need to consider all birds, and with a larger, again, bump up that habitat replacement. Right now it's 3-to-1. The other big thing, the big deal, the environmental impact statement only looks at habitat as valuable for breeding birds. You know, kind of dismisses some of the birds. They say, well, they were just here, they didn't breed here. Stopover habitat for migratory birds is critical. You know, they need it. They're exhausted, they've been flying, they fly at night, a lot of these birds, and they need places to stop and rest and then continue. And they did not consider that. Next. Okay, just some general habitat recommendations, kind of by all that we talked about. When we think of all the development that's gonna happen, not only Micron, but like I said, these subsidiary industries, housing, whatever. Require developers to maintain natural features, maintain at least patches of forests or meadows or wetlands. Support native plant nurseries. And how many people here do native plant landscaping or habitat landscaping? That's gonna become hugely important as residential areas may have to become habitat for some of these species. And then why don't we think about road crossings for some of these slower animals? There's gonna be so much more traffic on the roads. A lot more turtles are gonna get killed and frogs, etc. For some of the slower, smaller moving animals. And then, you need to monitor the success of everything you try to do.
So what's a good road crossing for a frog?
For a frog,
Yeah.
again, I'm not an expert, but yeah,
Underneath.
underneath, yeah. And I don't know, if any of you have seen the big road crossings for the mountain lions. I mean, those are massive things with habitat on top and, we're not, although Micron should be able to pay for that, but. For a frog or a turtle or a toad,
Now you're asking us to rank the species.
yeah, the underpass. And I just want to acknowledge our wetlands wildlife team. The one person missing there is Dr. Vanessa Rojas, who's a fan expert. And I don't see Maddie, so I guess I'm going to,
Well, I'm gonna just mention briefly the Wetland Trust, and you can find out about them online. There's the address, thewetlandtrust.org. It's an interesting website. It gives you some basic information. It says that if you're interested in purchasing mitigation credits, give us a call. I didn't find the phone number. However, I did a little Google search for the Wetland Trust and I found a phone number. I called Friday. I spoke to Jim Curatolo.
yeah,
Because he was the founder of the Wetland Trust, and he was mentioned in the recent newspaper article about the
Yeah,
bats and
yeah.
the white leg and so forth. And he told me he thought it was a great article because actually he wasn't aware of all the great history that Len Coyne put in that article. And it was a very interesting article. And we're certainly very happy for whatever bats will
Right.
inhabit White Lake and thrive there. And apparently there's a great bat cave there, which humans can't get into, so that's a good thing. So I just thought I'd share what little information I could gather because I was curious about the process. What does the Wetland Trust, do? How do they help this process out? They call this in lieu fee wetland mitigation. It's what they do. The US Army Corps of Engineers, you saw that previous slide, they're involved. They approve the ratio, like how many credits should a place be replaced with. So they say it's a scientifically based watershed approach. The permittee, which would of course in this case be Micron, calls TWT up, they can find a number, and basically says, we need to purchase some mitigation credits because we're gonna be, killing off all this stuff over here. So, they have actually purchase prices on their website. So you can find out what it costs to get a mitigation credit based on the area. Okay. And then, so an important thing to note here is that what this Wetland Trust is offering to Micron or others purchasing the credits is that they're taking the responsibility to do the mitigation. That's who's responsible once Micron pays up. It's the Wetland Trust. So that's part of the reason I really wanted to hear from the Wetland Trust.
Right.
I reached out to the executive director, Dan Kwasnowski. Jim said that he was on vacation this past week, so Dan didn't get back to me. However, I said to Jim, it'd be kind of great to interview Dan, get a little information for those of us here in the public who just kind of want to know, how does this process work? And in fact, maybe they take volunteers. Maybe some people want to be involved in rehabbing wetlands or know more about, well, what can I do as a homeowner? Is there anything I can do? So I haven't given up on necessarily hearing from them or contacting them. I think it's worth doing, and it would be great to know a little bit more. If you want to reach out to Dan, you could email him yourself and ask some questions. Dan used to be in planning here in Onondaga County. Yeah, several years ago. I don't know who here may know that, but that was one of the little factoids I found out about Dan. And he may in fact live in the area, I don't know, but, and I'm not suggesting anything about Dan, I think he's probably a perfectly wonderful guy. And this sounds like they do a lot of good work, but we just really want to know a little more, is kind of what my feeling is. It'd be nice to know a little bit more about how this whole process works. And what has Micron actually purchased at this point, or where are we at in that process, and how's it gonna happen?